So you saw the thumbnail had Breaking Bad and D&D, but this is not a Breaking Bad D&D campaign video. For that, you need Copperhead County, Cartel, or maybe even Fiasco. Instead, we are going to dig deeper on a frequent issue addressed in RPG books and tabletop forums: problem players. I'm taking this to the extreme with the worst party imaginable. What if you had to run a game for the characters of Breaking Bad? How would you handle their behaviors to maintain a good game experience for the entire group? Now, I already did this with the gang from Always Sunny, which is why this video is my Electric Boogaloo. So, if you want more context, check that one out first. But don't feel like you have to. That was Mad Max 1, this is The Road Warrior. We're going to dive into the Jackson system. Justify the game, accept the players, examine behaviors, and nullify problems. Just one last thing for the intro, and that is the protagonist but not the hero of the Breaking Bad tale, Walter White. Walt is a bit of a control freak, struggling to gain control after a cancer diagnosis forces him to look at his dissatisfying work life, social standing, and role within the family. He turns to using his expertise with alchemy supplies to make the best meth he can in an ever-escalating adventure fraught with thieves' guilds, assassins, dungeons, combat encounters, and convoluted quests that carry drama and hijinks in equal measure. But I already covered the control freak archetype with Dennis in the Always Sunny video. Instead of being one of our problem players, the Dungeon Master role is going to be played by Heisenberg himself. I'm TrueSide Jackson, you're curious enough to still be watching, and this is the worst D&D party ever. More than a simple distraction or bonding activity, a good D&D campaign can emphasize teamwork, empathy, and diversity in a way that makes it a perfect team-building activity. Walter White certainly has a lot of rivals in the drug game, so our goal is to relieve tensions with a nice game night. We'll use our own house to make ourselves both vulnerable and the host of the affair. We'll get some tequila and order a couple of unsliced pizzas, and provide pre-made character sheets and dice for everyone at the table. And I want you to imagine for just a second the world where Walter White puts all of his energy, his ingenuity, and his scientific genius towards running the very best D&D campaigns he can. Unfortunately, professional DMing wouldn't pay for his outrageous medical bills, so he would probably still cook a bunch of meth, but I truly think that an outlet like this can channel Walt's creative energy into something positive and community building, rather than something that is clearly destructive. There are obviously problems with having a total control freak as a dungeon master, but that's another video. Now, let's invite some players to our game. It's time to accept our players, but first we have to know who they are. If you haven't seen Breaking Bad, I'm not about to spoil anything or go into deep character analysis, I'm just going to give an introduction. And we need to ask, who would actually be pretty good to play with? Let's start with Jesse's crew. Combo, Badger, and Skinny Pete are slackers and drug dealers, but that's not going to inhibit their ability to have a good time and tell a good story together at the table. I've played D&D with these guys. Different names, but same dudes. Not a problem. On the other side of the law, we've got Hank. Hank's whole deal, or at least the facade he puts on, is one of toxic masculine bravado. He has to be the big dog in any room that he's in. But in the context of D&D, most parties could use a leader, and I actually believe that through Hank playing an idealized action hero who is forced to contend with his own flaws in some difficult situations, Hank could learn about himself and others. Hank is not a problem player. Double that for his partner Gomi, who just seems like a nice dude, your feelings for cops set aside. Hank's wife Marie has an eccentric personality and a kleptomaniac streak, which could be better played out as a rogue in the fantasy and the safety of the D&D table. I highly considered Kim Wexler to be our token girl in the group. Kim has a ton of baggage and an obsessive drive, but I think that can bring her to positive places and she would probably be a great team player. Kim is complicated, but I don't think she's a problem. Gale Bedecker plays D&D. I have zero doubt about this. Gale would bring his own snacks and paint everyone's minis. He is the opposite of a problem player. Similarly, Werner Ziegler would be a fantastic player, who probably knows more about indie European RPGs but is willing to give D&D a try if it benefits the group. Walt Jr., or Flynn, is having an adolescent identity crisis as he navigates a difficult home life and the troubles of growing up in the American public school system. But this is an adults-only game tonight, and I think Walt Jr. could express himself and make some friends at a high school D&D club with his peers. Nacho Varga is having his own identity crisis as he reckons with his role in the world of drugs and crime. I think a little D&D would be a nice escape and a chance to reflect. He could be a little rash at times, but I don't think he's a problem. So, let's get a little more extreme. Tuco Salamanca is a methed-out, murderous psychopath who will flip the table if he doesn't get his way. But he's also extremely easy to please with flattery and a good time, so I think he's not the worst on our list. His brother Lalo has both a tactical mind and a flair for the dramatic, making him a great addition to our table. Even if he was hired to kill me after the game, Lalo would play along and be a good sport up until everyone else left. The twins provide some difficulty with their silence, but I actually think some dice and goblins would get them to loosen up and get a little more chatty, as well as express themselves individually rather than as a duo. Rounding out the Salamanca crime family is Hector. Hector is infirm, but his mind is sharp, and with the help of the Bell, his nephews, and a D20 rigged to a trouble popper, I think Hector could relive his glory days murdering minions and stealing treasures. You may think I'm crazy, but I am 100% confident I could run a table for the 5 Salamanca boys and have a great time, even if I might wind up dead in a pool afterwards. However, a Salamanca family game night wouldn't serve our purposes as Walter White. Walt has bigger fish to fry in the meth business, namely Gustavo Fring. Gus has invited Walt over to his house, so we're going to return the favor by inviting him over for a game night. To help things along, we're going to need a mediator. Better call Saul. Saul Goodman, aka Jimmy McGill, will not be content to sit back and watch. He'll want to grab a character sheet and some ridiculous dice and ham it up as a wacky fantasy character. Now, Gus is naturally going to keep his guard up, assuming this is some kind of trap. And knowing Walt, this is not totally unreasonable, so Gus will be bringing along Mike Ehrmantraut. Anticipating this, and wanting to keep some balance of power, we'll be bringing along our own partner, Jesse Pinkman. Bitch. We have a pretty nice table, 4 dudes and DM, but for better or probably for worse, Skylar is going to find out about the drug kingpin we are inviting to our family home. She is going to ask too many questions and insert herself into the situation, so we're going to have to pull up an extra seat for her. Our game night is set, our one-shot is prepped and ready. What could possibly go wrong? Let's start with the obvious. Saul Goodman is a rules lawyer. This is one of the most common and most talked about problem player archetypes. Saul is going to take a disingenuous reading of the rules to create the best possible scenario for himself, in spite of the fact, or perhaps because of the fact, that it will make a worse time for everyone else trying to enjoy the game. Next, let's look at Jesse. I stated earlier that Jesse's crew would be fine to play with, and in that context, I think Jesse would be fine too. However, this is Jesse out of his element in a room full of people who intimidate him and a game he might not be into. Rather than trying to invest himself in the scenario in front of him, Jesse is going to distract himself with his own thoughts, ignoring others at the table and sabotaging his own good time. I'm calling Jesse the dice stacker. Mike is an interesting case. Mike has been there, done that. No matter what character sheet we give him, Mike will think he knows his way around every situation given his experiences. He will be irritable, hard to please, and probably more than a little stuck in his ways. Mike is a grognard, an old-school gamer unimpressed by any new tricks and new additions we bring to the table. Skylar is the nicest person on this list and the only one without a body count. The whole reason she's here is because she wants to help Walt and take some ownership over the situation for their family. Unfortunately, this kind of behavior can really damage the line between the players and the dungeon master. By openly critiquing and possibly even trying to take control over our every move, Skylar is not helping. She's hindering everyone's ability to experience the game. Skylar is a backseat driver, or in this case, the backseat DM. And finally, there's Gus. Gustavo Fring could easily be seen as a control freak himself, but I think there's a little more going on. Gus is cold and calculating. His desire to be the best takes on an impersonal quality as the personification of dehumanizing corporate efficiency. D&D is often said to be a game with no winners or losers. You either have a good time as a table or you don't. But that isn't going to stop Gus from trying to win at all costs, using the people at the table as resources just as much as any potion or spell slots. He will not come into the meeting unprepared. He will read up on the metagame and bring in his own optimized character, his own perfectly balanced $300 metal dice, and a final power move with the best tequila he can find. None of this is appropriate or conducive to a healthy group experience. But Gus doesn't care. He's a perfectionist. We know why we're playing, we know our 5 players, and we know the problems that can manifest. So, how do we combat this to still end the night with a memorable and positive experience that could well end our drug war and make us all better friends? It's time to nullify problems. Note that we are not trying to fix these people. We're just trying to combat their specific behaviors for the betterment of the entire group experience. The scenario is fake, but the advice is very much real, with almost every tip being something I've practiced to success in professional games. I used to think that the best way to handle a rules lawyer was to beat them at their own game. I actually run a pretty rules as written or raw D&D game, and my own knowledge of the rules often trumps people trying to use them in bad faith. Unfortunately, while I did earn a few Phoenix Wright victories for myself, this wasn't fun for anyone else at the table. So, as a rule, do not engage in a debate with the rules lawyer. You don't want to fight on their terms and take time away from everyone else, but instead, you want to bring them around to your terms for the table. You're not the opposing lawyer, you're the judge. When the rules lawyer inevitably brings up a dispute, we're going to simply appease them and move on. Try some canned statements like, "Thanks, Saul, I never thought of it that way. Let's try it out next time," or "That's pretty clever. Catch me on Discord after the game and we'll chat about it." Quite often, in my experience, rules lawyers actually do think about the game in interesting ways that can contribute to something positive later on. But changing rules interpretations on the fly disrupts the consistency of the game, so it's better to table that conversation till later, especially if you can get them one-on-one. Consistency at the game table does matter, so before dice hit the table, make sure your players know if you're playing raw or if you have house rules. If you do have house rules, state them concisely. Sometimes a rules lawyer likes it if you show your work, something I learned running games through Roll20 and publicly posting my rolls and custom monster abilities in chat. It was actually a lot of fun for my more mechanically minded players to see how much thought I put into my homebrew, and if they had issues or ideas, they knew they could message me after. This creates a community environment rather than an adversarial one, and when a talented lawyer is actually on your side, they can help you against other problems that may arise. Many of the solutions that I used for Charlie in the Always Sunny video actually apply to Jesse as well. If he's going to be distracted, give him a constructive distraction by letting him draw everyone's characters or build the dungeon with dungeon tiles. Or don't worry about being constructive, just buy the meth addict a fidget spinner he can twiddle with under the table while still being engaged. We had tons of kids like this in our D&D after schools, and sometimes the solution was just to hand them a spinner and keep playing. Now, some of you are probably more worried about your players using phones, to which I say, that's just not a battle you're going to win. Not only is having a phone at the table not a big deal, but sometimes they can be used for spell apps or dice rollers. As long as we can channel Jesse's energy into something that doesn't distract the rest of the group, allowing him to multitask is not the worst thing and could actually help. But the best thing you can do to keep Jesse's attention is just do rad shit. Plenty of D&D tubers, including yours truly, talk about highbrow ideas like character arcs and evocative descriptions, but we can forget sometimes that most of us just want cool stuff to happen. If you think of something cool, just do it. Sometimes the best answer isn't to slowly build up to 10 sessions down the line. That long run isn't guaranteed, so do it tonight. And don't just lean on your own cool ideas. Let your players do their rad shit and support them when they do something cool. Finally, you can keep a dice stacker immersed by incorporating visual art and music into your games. Not everyone is drawn in by vocal performance alone or even by fancy terrain and minis, but by bringing in an experience that targets multiple senses, Jesse won't be able to get bored and start stacking his dice. I thought that passing control of our Spotify playlist might be overkill and lead to more distraction, but honestly, after building trust and tone for a session or two, I think that assigning Jesse to be the table's DJ could be a great way for him to get immersed in the game, get others to notice his creativity, and reduce our own workload as a DM. When it comes to a grognard, the first thing to understand is that this is not really a derogatory term. I've had good conversations and great games with my fair share of grognards, and while I don't think that their more traditional experience should be seen as law, that experience is valid, and you can learn a lot by earnestly chatting with them. With Mike, we're going to emphasize that experience and weave in some reasons within the fiction why Mike's character should be the group leader, rather than the bodyguard lackey. By paying Mike some extra respect, we allow him to guide the group as well as get him more invested in the story. When it's time to present challenges to the group, make sure you're letting them do the thinking, not just their characters. This brings up a little OSR philosophy on problem solving and combat encounters, which I don't think is always the right answer, but is totally the right call for Mike. You're going to want to incorporate some puzzles in your dungeons, as well as making your big boss fights engaging tactical puzzles that makes Mike stop and strategize rather than roll his eyes as he swings his longsword for the 12th time. Throughout all of this, make sure you're being genuine. Grognards are typically smart and they can tell when they're being pandered to, so don't pander. You can still show off your personal style, and by doing so, you might actually show Mike something he hasn't seen before. And from experience, I can tell you that there's nothing better than when the previously jaded grognard comes around to your side and has your back moving forward. If you can thread the needle of paying tribute to old school sensibilities without pandering to the player, you might just wind up with an old friend and the best player at your table. So, it's time to talk about our wife. That's a neat sentence. Anyway, Skylar wants to be involved and show that she can contribute. We can either assert our dominance as the breadwinner and the god of the gaming table, or we can just let her contribute. She's good with accounting, let her be the party's treasurer, XP tracker, or journalist so she can feel like a meaningful part of the group experience. If that's not enough and she wants to support us behind the DM screen, again, literally just talk to your wife and let her help you. No, she can't really be the co-DM. I've been on all sides in multiple scenarios of this and it never goes well, but she can absolutely be a brainstorming partner for your session prep, help you pick out maps and minis, and above all, help be the host to the game night at the house you both share. To be honest, I am not a fan of playing host and scheduling games, so when my own partner who I live with takes the reins on texting the group chat and herding all the cats before welcoming them in with a smile and passing them homemade cold brew, Not only is that great for all of them, but it relieves me of a major burden so that I can focus more on plot and characters. Thanks, babe. You're the best. But that's not to say we should give her so much of a role that she ceases to become a player having the same fun as everyone else. We're going to make sure that Skylar has agency in the game through her character. If she sees that she has some control over the in-game story we are telling collaboratively with the rest of the group, she won't try to seize control over the out-of-game experience. You don't want to play favorites at the table and overemphasize the role of your partner's character, but it is important to make sure they get just as much of a say in what's going on. Let her help, let her play, and remember that your partner is your friend just as much as your gaming bros and business associates. Gustavo Fring, the worst of the worst. I have no doubt that this man would be a nightmare to run a game for. Everything that we've talked about so far is creating a healthy group environment, but that's not what Gus wants. If anything, he wants the veneer of a cozy community, but one where he's actually the tyrant. Even in the most group-oriented roundtable-style games, at some point, the game master has to make the calls and narrate the story, and Gus is going to have to accept that he is not in that role. Our goal will be to show him that that doesn't matter. He can still have a good time in the safe space where he is allowed to lighten up and be himself. I mentioned earlier that Gus is the kind of player who would know all about monster stat blocks and the rules of the game. Simply shouting "no metagaming" at this person isn't going to cut it. The cat's out of the bag, and pretending the cat isn't there won't help things. So when it comes time for fighting a monster Gus knows everything about, we're going to let him be the one to track the HP, the legendary actions, and the resistances. You can actually tie this into the game rules with archetypes like the Battlemaster Fighter or the Monster Hunter Ranger. Gus gets to show off his confidence in his rules knowledge while contributing to the group and lightening our own mental load. And if we feel like throwing in a curveball when the monster secretly has a mythic final form or a hidden weak spot, I think Gus will be delighted by the surprise when we pass him the note card under the table and let him reveal this information to the group. This goes into my second tip for dealing with a perfectionist. For Mike, we want to provide challenge through tactical decision-making and puzzle solving. For Gus, we want to provide challenge through creativity. Just think back to how Gus is genuinely impressed by Walt's high-purity blue meth. He may not express it, but Gus isn't just about numbers. He's open to new ideas if it means progress and a better outcome. Gus probably has plenty of his own ideas, and even if he doesn't trust us enough to share them now, by building trust over the game session, you might just find a collaborator behind the screen. Many of my own best game sessions came about in part because I exchanged private messages with one of my players to hatch an idea that would affect everyone at the table. And these weren't just me letting them in on my scheme. This was me listening to them as an equal partner in what was to come. If we can convince Gus to be our partner rather than our rival, this is going to have great payoff both in-game and out-of-game. So when Gus has a great idea or his perfect knowledge of the lore contributes to the party's victory, make sure that it is applauded and rewarded. It doesn't have to be a grand affair, and in fact, in Gus's case, trying to rile up the table to cheer for him will absolutely be seen as pandering for some angle. Just casually pass him an inspiration token or text him a "nicely done" on Discord. And that's our game. Now, I can't guarantee that this scenario would produce better results in the long run in Breaking Bad, and I'm not about to write that fanfic. But if at least one tip for at least one of these problem players helps you in your next game, this was worthwhile. Even if your own problem players aren't this extreme, remember, be nice to your neighborhood charlatan, try to see the potential in everyone, respect your elders, talk with your partner, and build bridges where possible. You may not feel like you have the power to change the healthcare system or the police or the economy, but I do genuinely believe that you have the power to spark positive change for your friends and your community with one really good game night. Have a nat 20 day. Bye bye.